So, a little bit about myself. So you can frame who I am and how I got here. Growing up, I became vegetarian fairly young, and as a kid, I was always very confused about human psychology because I did not, thank you so much, thanks. I did not understand how it was we behaved the way we did, especially toward non-human animals. And so I got my master's degree in psychology. After I got my master's in psychology, I started to study more about sustainability, because another piece about human behavior that I really struggle to understand, besides how we treat other human animals, is how we treat ourselves and the planet. Like, we are so destructive, and it's something that is actually destroying, thank you, our ability to live, right? So as I started thinking about these things, I'm a research nerd, so the way I responded was to do more research in it. And so my PhD studies were all about human behavior change and the environment. And the research that I've done includes how humans respond to problems and what we do about that long term to solve problems, but then also how we respond in ourselves to maintain resilience and health through really difficult times. So now I work for the Humane League, and I'm a training specialist. So I've been able to use my research in human behavior change and apply that to activism and how we can train new people coming in to do activism really well. But that's one piece of the puzzle. The other piece is, how do we keep people in activism? I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but consider whether you've ever felt so burned out that you don't know if you can continue doing this work. If we were going to raise our hands honestly to that question, my assumption, based on the research I've done, is that most of us would raise our hands. And probably some of us have already gotten burned out and left the movement and maybe come back, or maybe decided that they're not going to make their money in this. And that's a really unfortunate loss, because we can all be professionals who do our job really well for animals, for something we really care about. And so there are some issues that our movement needs really to face, especially when it comes to resilience and burnout, and helping ourselves become more professional in the work that we do, helping ourselves be more resilient in the work that we do so that we can stay in it and we don't lose our good professional capabilities, minus my non-professional tech skills, to other areas, to other fields. So we're going to talk about these three topics that really connect to form a much stronger movement: resilience, self-care, and effective activism. So the research that I did most recently involves people who work at animal sanctuaries, and then the organizations, the animal sanctuaries themselves. And what I studied was what makes organizations sustainable and what makes individuals resilient and healthy in their work. And the first finding was that both individuals and the organization themselves, they need a supportive community. This makes sense, right? We all know that it's a lot easier to be around supportive, happy vibes than it is to be around a bunch of haters. If you're in a really unhealthy, unsupportive environment, nobody's going to stay in that. And an individual who doesn't feel support isn't going to feel good about the work they're doing. The second finding that I had in my research at animal sanctuaries was we need to have some sort of sense of progress. So it doesn't mean that we're all going to say, okay, our progress is that animals are liberated. Obviously, that's our long-term goal, but if that's what we set ourselves up to imagine ourselves accomplishing, we are in for a really long, heartbreaking journey, and many people will not be able to stay on that task. So we need to set up ways that we can find achievement and a sense of progress along the way. That helps us mentally, but also for organizations, it contributes to our sustainability. And you can imagine this for a few reasons. It increases our sense of well-being as an organization. It helps us build support from other people, from donors, that we need to be able to show we can do something with the money that you give us, right? We're doing something to move the bar forward. And finally, self-care. So for an organization, that means setting up ways that within our groups, people feel that they have the autonomy and the expectation, the responsibility to take care of themselves and take care of each other. Individually, we all know about self-care, right? This is why everybody does yoga and hires a life coach. And no judgment, I do both. And I think that that's so much more important than many of us let ourselves believe. I think that in this field, we sort of have this mentality that if we take care of ourselves, we're taking away from the animals. We should do this work for free. We should work 60 hours a week. We should be giving up everything that we have because the animals have nothing and we have to help them. We're all guilty of thinking that way. Certainly I think that way a lot. I can push myself a little bit further because the more work I do now, the more I'm helping animals sooner. The problem is, when we suffer ourselves, we're not taking suffering away from anybody else. All we're doing is adding a lot of stress and sickness and general unwellness to our own bodies and our own mind, and that greatly contributes to burnout. We tend to think like this little flower. We tend to think, I can thrive in a really shitty environment. Well, we could argue that that is the way the world is. It is really freaking hard to be an activist for animals right now. It is really difficult. We are in a world that does not give us a lot of hope. And so in a lot of ways, we are like that flower. But the more that we can create a supportive community around us, the better we're going to be. The more that we can give ourselves self-care and give ourselves some sense of accomplishment, the better we'll be. So none of these are surprising when we think about it, but all of these are areas in which I'm going to guess most of our organizations have progress to make. So, resilience is the general term that captures our sense of ability to respond to stressors and to strategize a response instead of immediately reacting. Resilience is our ability to withstand some difficulty, to get through low points in our life without feeling a strong sense of dread or total loss and confusion about what to do next. So we build our resilience through practice. And if we don't practice building that resilience through self-care, through finding support in our community, through making accomplishments, in some way, making progress somehow, if we don't build resilience when we don't feel like we need it as much, then when we really do, we can't just fabricate resilience out of nowhere. So, the better we do at self-care for ourselves and building ourselves up and building up each other, then the better we are able to respond to the incredibly difficult world around us. And it's our responsibility to do so, because in the long run, this is how we're going to win this battle. I had mentioned responding instead of reacting. So this is not to say that we shouldn't feel emotions. We absolutely should feel emotion. We absolutely should feel some righteous anger about what we are dealing with. And that's what's going to motivate us to do our work. But anger itself is not actually an emotion. Anger covers other core emotions. It covers fear and vulnerability and shame, things we do not want to feel. And so instead, we often react with anger. The problem with it is because it's not a core emotion that's informing us of something, it's just covering the truth up, then when we respond with it, we're not actually putting out anything real. So when we think about resilience and our ability to strategically respond, righteous anger is a choice, and it's a strategic choice, and we decide how we're going to use it, just like we decide how we're going to do everything. But we use our emotions, our real emotions, our sense of fear, our sense of vulnerability with each other to inform the work that we do. And what I've learned over time is when people respond to each other with what's really happening, when we're honest with each other and discuss our fears, we discuss our joy, that feels a lot better than when we let ourselves get angry with each other. So one of the biggest pieces that I took away from the work I did with animal sanctuaries was those who work really hard to feel emotions together and then strategize a response to move forward are so strong and so resilient that they can't be beat. They are the ones who become sustainable because they're working as a team. So I'm going to talk about 4 ways that we build resilience in ourselves. And individuals and organizations are the same, right? Organizations are individuals. So we talk about this interchangeably. What works for you as a person is going to work for you in your work life and is going to help the groups that you're in, the organizations you work for. It's all interchangeable. So like I said, the first step is identifying what our emotions really are and then working with them. Emotions are something that we usually say like we need to manage. I really feel uncomfortable with that language because we don't need to manage them. They're very important parts of our work. We just need to make sure that they don't control us. They're one of the pieces of information that we take in so that we check ourselves, we know what we're feeling. It helps us determine what we're thinking, and that helps us determine our actions moving forward. So the first step to resilience is recognizing how you feel, finding a supportive community that you can talk about those feelings with, and then move forward. The second step is to become a student. Have that learner's excitement about everything and every day. I used to be a college professor for 5 years, and at the first day of school, I had to go through this mantra that I was there to do the learning. And that took the stress away that I had of having to be the one who's raising awareness and teaching and organizing what we are to learn and seeing myself as the person that has to pull everybody else along with me. That's our work, right? Is pulling a lot of people who don't want to come with us. And that is exhausting. But if you reframe what we do as an opportunity to learn what makes people tick, what can I learn from this person so that I can see what they value and reframe what I'm trying to get them to see, right? So it's part of strategy, but it's much easier than we think it is. We don't have to come up with a bunch of points of argument. We don't have to have a perfectly scripted way of speaking to people who don't understand what we're doing. we can go into it as a student with curiosity and just say, what do I have to learn from this person? What do I have to learn from this experience? And when you think of everything as a learning opportunity, life gets a lot more exciting. I talked a little bit about self-care. This is a commitment you need to make for yourself. If you don't maintain boundaries and hold yourself accountable to what you need to sleep well, you need to eat well, you need to fill in the blanks for what those pieces of self-care are for you. If you don't say, this is how much time I commit every day to my self-care, this is what I do every day, this is my routine, that's part of a practice too. That's part of your resilience practice. And if you don't commit to it, everybody else is going to take that time. And as soon as you've lost your ability to take care of yourself, you will burn out. So you have to decide what is most important to you that helps you feel good. Those of you who were here in the very beginning and I asked you to reflect on what times that you have felt like a really solid human doing good work and feeling energized by it and times you haven't. Think about in those times if you were committing to self-care or if you weren't. And when you do commit to self-care, you tend to be so much more resilient and feeling so much better about the work you do. So this is a responsibility we have not just to ourselves, but to the animals we're working for. And like I said, one of the signs of resilience is an organization that comes up with some sort of result. Remember, we can't pin everything on the ultimate liberation of all animals. Of course, that's where we're going. But along the way, we need to find milestones. We need to know we're on the right track. We need to be making steps forward. And when we realize we're doing something that doesn't push us forward, we need to make a new plan. And so as individuals, that means every day considering what you do, deciding if it works. If it doesn't work, consider something new. We tend to get stuck in these sunk costs, right? I've been doing something for so many years. This is what I do. It's part of my identity. But then if we stop and turn around one day and realize that that has not been working, then we have wasted so much time and energy. So I went vegetarian when I was about 4. I still am in a family where I am the only vegan. There are a couple vegetarians who, after years of being around me, found their way to that. So obviously, some ways that I've been advocating for animals with my family have not been working. And that's not to say that my activism has been a failure, but that is to say, either I don't target my family with these values, or I do it differently. But if I were to remain stuck in the way that I responded to my family when I was 10, and continued to do that, not only would they still not be vegan, we'd probably hate each other. So the way that I've made progress with my family has been through a lot of trial and error and doing things differently as I go along to realize what resonates with them. And so we have to do that every day with everybody around us, with our organizations. Stop, determine, are we getting the achievements that we want? And if not, how do we redirect ourselves? Or realign what our sense of progress is, right? These are things we have to continue to critically think about. And that's okay to do. It's important to do. Critically thinking and changing our mind is a beautiful part of life. And when we think like a student, it's a lot easier. So we're going to take 1 minute right now to do another little moment of visualization. In a second, if you choose to stand to do this, that will be great, or you can do this in your mind. But what I'm going to want you to do is ground yourself with your feet into the ground like a tree would be into the ground. You can stand if you would like to, or you can sit, doesn't matter. And then your arms, because we're trees now, right? If you haven't figured that out, we're trees. And your arms are your branches, and you can stretch those out in your mind or actually. And now we're awake, so that's one good piece of this. Now, as you're doing this or thinking about this, reflect on your feet. These are your roots. These are your self-care strategies that keep you grounded. These are your innate talents, the aspects of you that you feel solid about. Whatever it is that you are, whatever your identity is that you feel really good about, whatever your routine is that you've committed to feel solid in your work, those are all your roots. If you feel like you need some more roots, that's great. We all always do. So take a moment to consider, what roots am I already growing, or do I need to start growing? Is it a self-care routine? Is it yoga? Is it a life coach? Reading more? And now pull all that strength that you already have or will be developing because you've committed to that up through your core or through your trunk, and then consider your arms, your branches. This is where you communicate to the rest of the world what you have to offer. And it's also where you get from other people what they have to offer you. So if you work with a group, what ways are you strengthening that group? What ways are they strengthening you? Who in your community supports you? When you're ready, you can sit down and bring yourself back into the room. Trees are really good at being effective. Trees will realize from each other if somebody nearby them is missing a certain nutrient, and they will give up some of their nutrients for their neighbors. And they will gladly take in nutrients from their neighbors. If they feel a part of themselves is sick, they will stop giving resources to the sick part that needs to be let go, or they will give more of their resources to the area of their body that needs to be supported and nurtured. So they are deciding constantly where the energy and where the nutrients need to go, as individuals and as a forest. And that's something we need to be doing. And I'm going to go ahead and say that as a movement, we need to do that better. And there are lots of ways that we all need to think about and discuss what that means. Where is better? Where is more effective? It looks different. I'm not saying that I know the answers to that. I don't. And it's not to say either that I feel really critical about what we do in a negative way, but that we should always be critical about what we're doing to make sure every day that we're reevaluating. So, the biggest piece of resilience, besides our self-care and our community support, is strategy. The first part of strategy is to do what works for you. So you need to come up with a metric that you decide, what does progress mean? What does that look like? What are the milestones you as an individual are going for? What are the milestones that you as a group of people, if you're in one, going for? And remember, those might change, and they should. Hopefully they change because we just keep knocking down these little achievements that we're aiming for. But another piece to determining your metric for success is joy. Do not do work you hate. Don't do work that burns you out. The movement is full of so many different ways to strike at this giant root of our problem. We all get to take part in that. It's not a competition. There are many ways that are effective, and probably we need to be doing a lot of different things, right? So that's great. There's lots of room. But don't feel like you have to do a certain thing because someone else told you to. Don't feel like you have to let yourself be used or abused because it's for the animals. Stand up for yourself. Determine what works for you. And don't do work that doesn't make you feel whole, because you will burn out, and we can't afford to lose you. So decide what that means for you. When I worked at sanctuaries, for some people, that was their jam. They felt so good about it. And there's an argument about sanctuaries costing a lot of money and being less effective. But there are so many amazing things that happen because of sanctuaries. So they are effective. And if you are a person who does really good work, where you feel really good because you are at a sanctuary working directly with animals, awesome. Stay there. Do that work. Love it. Show people how much you love it. If you hate it, don't do it. I hated it. I hated being in a sanctuary every day, shoveling poop, waking up so early, doing the same thing every day, cutting fruit for hours. Oh, I hated it. And it just drained me. And I was a horrible person at it. Like I sucked at it. So why am I doing this, right? I'm a nerd. I belong like researching and reading. And so when I realized I can do that in this movement, everything changed for me. Avoid toxicity. Don't get into angry arguments. We've all done this. I just did this on Facebook yesterday. Like, oh, it's so easy to just like trigger your, and it feels good, right? Anger feels good. It's so much easier to be angry. That's why we do it. Anger can be a strategy, like I said, but it's not healthy for us as an emotional reaction. And so it's best to figure out how you can, in a straightforward, matter-of-fact, unemotional way, say what your argument is and walk away. Give the person who wants to argue with you a reasonable thought that they have to chew on. They have to work through something that was really logical and compelling. Don't argue with emotions that will just up their desire to argue back with emotions. You're just in a slugfest and nobody's going to win. No minds are going to be changed. You've wasted a bunch of energy and burned yourself out just a little bit more. So don't engage with that. This goes along with our self-care practice of seeing the world as an opportunity to learn. Be curious. Ask questions. If you are genuine and sincere in saying to somebody, tell me more about what you feel about that. They feel that. They know you care, and we should care. We're vegan. We're animals, and we're vegan. So to be mean to other animals who are human just because they're ignorant and damaged and maybe, just like really bad, shitty people. But we still don't get to not be vegan. Like that's our value that we identify with very strongly. So of course we should keep that front and center, even when we're communicating with people who don't agree with us. So be curious, ask questions. They should respond in kind, and if they don't, it was not going to be worth your time anyway. Instead, just let your life speak for you. Find what feels really good and love it. Love what you're doing. Let people see that you love it. Invite people in to the greener side of the fence because it feels so good to be here. That's what's going to bring people in. So if it's working at a sanctuary, if it's doing undercover work, if it's organizing, if it's research, if it's teaching, whatever it is going to be for you, and probably a bunch of different things at the same time or in succession, do it joyfully, do it wholeheartedly, and that's what's going to bring people in. And it's what is going to help you sustain yourself and feel resilient. And then when times are difficult, you have your core, your daily life that you have built intentionally. And you have your self-care practices to rely on when things are difficult. So that's all I have. I have time for questions. Thank you.